My name is Darren Sahota, the PRI coordinator for the East Midlands region. Welcome to the third of our series of presentations on routes to membership. This presentation is titled The Part 3 Exam and How to Prepare. If you're attending this presentation, I assume that you are either a graduate with maybe some years of experience or even a student perhaps. But either way, somebody who seeks chartered membership status with the iStruct-T, you may even be a mentor responsible for guiding others through the qualification process. So I hope this session is enlightening and useful to you. I'll hand over to our Deputy Chief Executive, Darren Byrne, now, who will deliver the presentation.
Darren, thanks very much. And thanks to the East Midlands Regional Group for organising this series of presentations. Particular thanks to the Chair, Joe Reynolds-Smith, and also to Robert Moss for their efforts in organising the events. As Darren has said, today's presentation is on the examination and how to prepare. So we'll spend a little bit of time touching on the exam structure. I'm pretty sure everyone on the presentation today will be aware of the exam structure, but we'll touch on that. Changes to the exam format and content. We'll spend a little bit of time looking at the changes that were introduced in January 2024. We'll touch on the exam process and timetable. And then I think probably the more important part of the presentation, exam preparation and guidance. Now, clearly in an hour today, I'm not going to teach you everything that you need to know about the exam, but hopefully I'm going to signpost you to the comprehensive range of guidance and preparation materials and tools that the institution offers, and hopefully you'll take advantage of those. So let's look at the exam structure. As I said, all of you should be very aware of this. The Chartered Member exam has 5 questions. That has changed over the years. If you go back some years, there used to be 6, 7, 8, at one stage 9 questions. There are now 5. There is a range of questions, so covering different sides of projects, different types of experience. There'll always be a bridge question included in the selection of 5. The good news for those people who choose to sit the exam is only 1 question must be answered. The good news, bad news, depending on your point of view, is you have 7 hours to complete the exam. So that's pretty much well understood. Now let's look at the exam itself. You have 2 main sections, section 1, section 2. And we'll look at those particular sections in a little bit more detail later on. The key point here is you have section 1, it's worth 50 marks. You have section 2, it's worth 50 marks. Both sections must be passed in order to pass the exam. So there's no point spending all your time on section 1 and say getting 40 out of the 50 marks and then getting 15 marks in the second section. No, you have to get 20 marks out of section 1 and you have to get 20 marks out of section 2. So time management, making sure you answer all elements of the exam, all the sections, is pretty important. So let's look in a little bit more detail at section 1 and section 2 and what we're actually looking for. So 2 main sections, section 1, section 2, you have to pass both section 1 and section 2. They are divided into 5 subsections. So section 1A is the conceptual design element. It's 2 distinct and viable solutions to a complex brief. Section 1B is recommendations on material usage to be communicated to a client via an email or a letter. Section 2, you have parts C, D, and E. 2C is relevant design calculations, and we'll touch on the importance of the word relevant or principle later on. 2D is general arrangement drawings, and 2E, method statement. Now, the key point here is you don't have to pass each subsection. So section 1A has 40 marks, section 1B has 10 marks. You don't have to pass section 1A and section 1B and section 2C, not the individual subsections. You just need to make sure you get enough marks to pass section 1 and section 2. But again, as I said on the previous slide, it is important that you try and attempt each part of the exam. 1A right the way through to 2E. The reason being, you could pick up a couple of easy marks in section 2E, a couple of easy marks in section 1B. That could be the difference between you passing the section and ultimately passing the exam. So those candidates who say, I'm just going to spend all my time on 1A and I'm not really going to worry about 1B, we wouldn't recommend that. We don't think that's good practice. Make sure you get your time management sorted out so that you can cover all 5 subsections within the exam. So, section 1, we ask you to prepare a design appraisal with appropriate sketches indicating 2 distinct viable and sustainable solutions for the proposed structure, including the foundations. Now, this year you'll see, as from 2024 onwards, we've introduced far more focus on sustainability into the examination, and we'll cover that in a little bit more detail. But when you look at this particular question, and this is taken from the January 2024 paper, question 1, it's no longer just 2 distinct and viable solutions, it's 2 distinct, viable and sustainable solutions. The section 1A question goes on to say, using sustainability as a key criterion, review and critically appraise the schemes and identify the solution you recommend, giving reasons for your choice. So sustainability is now important within section 1A. 40 marks for that particular part of the exam. Section 1B, after the scheme design is complete, the client asks you to suggest ways in which the brief could be altered to reduce material usage. So again, there's a focus on sustainability. This part of the exam is 10 marks. If we look at section 2, for the recommended solution for 1A, you will prepare sufficient design calculations to establish the form and size of all the principal structural elements. Take note of the word principle, because there is an element of judgment involved in this. It's not just a case of designing columns and designing slabs and beams, and I've got loads of things that I've designed. There's a judgment call. The candidate has to decide what are the principal, what are the important structural elements within their answer. You identify the principal structural elements, and then you'll do the design calculations. As from 2024 January exam, you need to include appropriate A1 to A3 carbon calculations for each of your principal elements. Section 2D is preparing your general arrangement drawings, and section 2E is preparing a detailed method statement for the safe construction of the works. You will note section 2E no longer requires you to produce a programme of works. And that brings us on to what has actually changed in 2024. Many people would argue the changes are quite significant insofar as clearly there is a focus on sustainability. So if we take 1A, we ask you to prepare a design solution indicating 2 distinct and viable solutions. That was the wording and the format that was used right the way up to 2023. The new criteria is demonstrating sustainable design credentials whilst responding to the client's brief. So it's 2 distinct, viable and sustainable structural options will be produced. Sustainability is a key criterion, and that's made clear in every question. So although the marks remain the same, it was previously 40 marks for 1A, it's still 40 marks for 1A. There's now greater focus on sustainability. Perhaps one of the biggest changes is section 1B. Section 1B previously used to be writing a letter to the client responding to a change request. So the client would say, I want to add a new floor, I want to put in a new basement, or I want to open up some a bigger atrium, whatever it may be. And you, the candidates, would have to actually understand the impact and write a letter to the client saying, okay, this is how the design is going to change and the impact of that. That's changed. We're now asking you to write to the client and suggest ways in which you can reduce material usage whilst maintaining the specified outcomes in the brief. It can be a letter, it can be an email, but it has to be a professional letter or an email. So it's still a professional communication. The marks remain the same, 10 marks. but clearly the nature of the communication is different as from 2024. Section 2C, marginal changes. You'll see it used to be 20 marks, it's now 22 marks. It's still a focus on preparing the design calculations for the principal elements, but we've added in the A1 to A3 carbon calculations. So that has warranted a review of the mark split, and so it's now 22 marks for section 2C. 2D, which is the general arrangement drawings, hasn't changed at all. 2E, basically, we've given 2 extra marks to the calculations. We've taken 2 marks out of section 2E. We still need to produce the detailed method statement, but the construction program is no longer required. So all of these changes have been communicated over the last 2 years or so. And if you need any more information on these, I would strongly suggest you look at this document, the exam preparation guidance for the chartered member exam. You've got 10 parts to that document: the introduction to the exam and general tips, moving on to time management, how you should split your exam. For the average candidate, obviously, each and every candidate will need to decide, how much time they need for each element of the exam. Sometimes you're a little bit quicker at the calculations. Sometimes you need a little bit more time for the drawings. So it's up to you to decide what is an appropriate timetable for your exam. But this gives you an indication of what we would normally expect to see, or at least what we would recommend. You then move on in sections 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 to a more detailed explanation of what is a distinct, viable, and sustainable solution. How distinct does it need to be? Is it okay if I change the material and it's changed from concrete to steel or vice versa? Is that sufficiently distinct? The answer would be no. But this guidance documentation will tell you, well, what are the things that you should be considering changing? What does viable mean? What does sustainable mean? And it takes you through each part of the examination and gives you guidance as to what the examination panel expect to see in a good script. There are then 2 sample or example questions at the end of that preparation guidance. Again, it gives you an indication of how a candidate might go about answering the new style question. So if you haven't already read the exam preparation guidance, that was updated, would have been, I think, around about November last year. Then I strongly recommend you get onto our website, download it, and read that document. Okay, the exam timetable. So the exam is normally held in January and July each year. During COVID years, it did change. Clearly, we couldn't always get into the centres in January and July because of international, national, local restrictions, whatever it may be. But we always try and hold the exam in January and July each year. The day of the week will change. So, don't think it's always going to be held on a Friday, which used to be the case. We now rotate it through the week, so it might be on a Monday in one year, it could be on a Thursday the next year. Again, that's trying to recognise the international nature of the institution. We have members all around the world. There are different weekends, there are different religious observances, etc., etc. So we try to rotate the day to make the exam as inclusive and accessible as possible. Results are normally published in April and October. And many candidates actually say, wow, I took the exam in January and I don't get my results until April, or I took the exam in July and I don't get my results until October. We'll cover the marking process later on in the presentation, but it does take a good few months to mark the exams and go through the process. So clearly, if you're sitting the exam in January, we would normally expect to get the results in April. If you're sitting it in July, it's normally the results published in October or so. Now, if you pass the exam, and assuming you've satisfied all the other requirements, including passing the PRI, if you get your exam results in April, we'll try to elect you to chartered membership in May. If you get your results in October, then we work very quickly to try and get you in at the end of October or beginning of November. So the delay between the results and the election is not significant as long as you pass the other requirements, i.e. you've passed the professional review interview. So how do you go about applying? And again, the website is the first port of call. You can see there www.icgt.org, training and development, membership exams, chartered membership exam. So that's the email or the website address that you need. You can go onto the part of the website and you will see all the information about the application process. So that's a screenshot that I took off the current website, and it's talking about bookings for the 16th of July exam. So 16th of July 2024, they're currently open. They'll close on the 17th of June. So generally we tend to close the application for the exam around about a month before the exam. Just gives us time to make sure we've got all the right setup in each of the different centres. You can have 50 to 60 exam centres scattered around the world. Some of them will have 200 candidates, some of them will have 1 candidate. So we need that time to make sure all the exam centres are set up. We need the time to make sure that you're going to the right exam centre, you've got your candidate number, all the papers are sent out, etc. So if you're thinking about applying, note that the deadline for applying for the exam normally is about a month before the actual exam itself. You should also be aware that you need to apply for chartered membership first. So you'll need to submit your M form, and that gives us all the core data that we need to process your application through to chartered membership. And it's off the back of that that you'll then sit the professional review interview, or you'll then sit the exam. So again, you need to make sure your application form M is submitted in due course and in due time. All the information about how you do that, all of it available online, and the application process is available online. So on the day of the exam, you will have received around about 2 weeks or so prior to the exam an email saying, here's your exam centre, please make sure you know where it is. If at all possible, go along to the exam centre, have a look and check out where the exam will be held. Make sure you know where the room is for the exam. This sounds common sense, but sometimes we might use a university. And as we all know, university campuses can be quite confusing, and sometimes it might take you a little bit of time to track down the right building, and it might take you a little bit of time to track down the right room. So always make sure you know where you're going. Look in the My Account section. The My Account section of the website, which has your personal area, that's where you see your subscription information, your personal exam information, your candidate number. Look in the My Account area and make sure you've got the information for your exam. Don't look at the generic web page. Go to My Account and look at your particular detail. Now, always arrive in good time. You don't want to be racing for the exam and running in flustered. You'll normally be allowed into the exam hall from around about 9 o'clock onwards. You settle down, make sure you've got your books in the right places and all the files, etc. that you need. 9:15, you get the chance to read the paper. There's no writing. You can't scribble on the question sheet or the answer paper or anything. It's simply an opportunity for you to go through the 5 questions. And I say this a bit facetiously. It's one of my favourite times of the exam, because you see the candidates going through and they look at the first one and they kind of go, nope. And they look at the second one and they go, nope. And they look at the third one and say, don't like that one. And they tend to go through the 5 questions and they say, right, it's question 1, question 2, whichever question best suits your experience. 9:30, the exam starts, off you go. 1 o'clock, you break for a half-an-hour lunch. There's no reading or writing, no discussion during the lunch break. So it's not a case of you're able to write notes or review your paper. You simply stop writing, you turn your paper over, and you go and have a break, have your lunch, recharge your batteries. You start again at 1:30. The exam finishes for most candidates at 5 o'clock. Now, I said for most candidates, some candidates will have reasonable adjustments. So that's where they have a medical condition or a disability that warrants reasonable adjustments, and that could be extra time. It could be that they need to write the exam on a computer, or certain elements of the exam on the computer. If you do have a medical issue or a disability of any kind, and you want reasonable adjustments to be considered, write into the institution as far as possible ahead of your exam. Tell us what the medical condition is. We'll discuss with you any reasonable adjustments that we can make. Sometimes it might just be put in a private room. You know, whatever the situation is, we'll try and accommodate your needs. But that does mean that for some candidates, you'll be finishing at 5 o'clock, but you'll see another candidate continuing to write at 5:30, 6 o'clock. That might be because that candidate has got a reasonable adjustment. But for the majority of candidates, it's a 7-hour exam. The exam starts at 9:30, finishes at 5 o'clock. Now, the exam itself, not code specific. So this is a common question that we get. Can I use Euro codes? Can I use American codes? Can I use some other code? Absolutely. As long as you specify the code that you're using at the start of the exam, you can use whatever code you want. This is really not a test of code application. It's a test of your ability to produce 2 distinct, viable and sustainable solutions and take that through the analysis, you know, the general arrangement drawings, etc., etc., etc. So less about codes. It is open book, but please do not make the mistake of bringing in multiple books. I will tell you a story of a time that I was at an exam centre in London, and I saw a candidate come into the exam hall, and he had a suitcase on wheels. And this wasn't just a small carry-on case. It was, you know, I'm going on a full summer holiday for 2 weeks case. And he opened up all of his books and laid them out on the table. He needed an additional table because there were that many books. He started the exam late, got to around about 10:30, put his hand up, and he said, "No, this is not going to work. Can I leave the exam hall?" Yes, you can. If you need that many books, and if you need to look through that many books, well, then your chances of passing the exam are reduced because you can't spend time flicking through books and reading through books. There's already enough pressure on you in the exam to complete everything within 7 hours. Generally, when I look at candidates, if a candidate comes in with perhaps 1 or 2 files, probably got post-it notes scattered around, yellow, purple, red post-it notes. Probably the file looks a bit rough. It's been used on a daily basis for a couple of years, might have a few coffee stains on it, that sort of thing. Those candidates who have 1 or 2 files, you know, rather than 10 books, generally tend to perform better. Everything is there in the file, everything is at their fingertips. If they need something, they know exactly where to go to in that file, flick open to the right page, they get the information, and they're already writing. And it's about preparation. So it is an open book exam, but please don't bring, you know, multiple books into the exam with you. You need to do your preparation beforehand, have everything in a couple of folders at your fingertips. There's no electronic devices, there's no laptops, there's no mobile phones or iPads or whatever the case may be. If you do come along with a mobile phone, don't be surprised if the invigilators ask you to put it in an envelope, and they'll keep it at the front of the exam. But rest assured, they definitely don't want to see a mobile phone or anything like that on your desk. That would lead to disqualification. So leave your mobile phone in your car, leave it with the invigilator, whatever the case may be, but don't have it on your desk. Final point here. The invigilators are not always chartered structural engineers. Indeed, they might not be engineers at all. So if you don't understand an element of the question, please don't ask the invigilators. It's not up to the invigilators to give you their judgment or their view, even if they are chartered structural engineers. You need to read the question, you need to understand the question, and if you're making assumptions, note those assumptions down on your answer script. So you've completed the exam, you know, 7 hours of fun. Some people have said it's the most fun that they've ever had. They like it so much, they come back year after year. But your paper has been collected by the invigilators. They're submitted to the institution. They're all scanned in, and then we have what's known as a trial marking meeting. So this is where all the marking examiners come together and they go through the scripts, they go through the marking scheme, and they say, right, how are we all going to mark these questions to ensure that we're as consistent as possible? So sometimes the marking scheme will be critiqued or slightly refined to make sure that all the examiners are as happy as possible in using that marking scheme to mark your paper. Most importantly, there's double blind marking. So what does that mean? You will have two examiners who will mark your script, but they do that independently. They're not in the same room, they're not talking to each other, they're not communicating with each other. They will be separate, often in different parts of the world. So again, don't think, well, because I'm in the UK, my two examiners are going to be from the UK, or because I'm in Hong Kong, my two examiners are going to be from the Hong Kong. No, you're going to have a pool of examiners, some of whom will mark question 1, some question 2, question 3, question 4, question 5, and they'll be from all parts of the world. But they will mark your script and they'll do it independently, and they'll submit what's known as raw marks to the institution. Hopefully it will be a pass from both examiners. Sometimes it's a fail from both examiners. You then have what's known as a normalization process. And this is a statistical process that we go through with all the scripts. And we say, well, how is your examiner marking your paper? Are they being strict? Are they being lenient? Do we need to reflect that in some way so that all the examiners are marking to a predefined norm? So there's a normalization process. So each candidate will now end up with 4 marks. 1 raw mark from each examiner, 1 normalized mark after that statistical process. The paper and the results will then be subject to moderation. So the exams panel will look at it and say, right, is that a clear pass? Great. You know, the 2 markers have said that you passed. The normalization process supports that. Brilliant. Is it a clear fail? The 2 examiners have failed you and the normalization process supports that. But sometimes, is there a difference of opinion? One examiner could give you a marginal pass, one examiner could give you a marginal fail. The normalization process might indicate there's a borderline candidate here. So in certain cases, papers are subject to review by the chief examiner, and that process is called adjudication. And often it's where there might be a very slight disagreement between the 2 examiners. You could be a borderline candidate, one passing you, one failing you. In those cases, we say, right, we've got to be certain here. We will pass your paper to the chief examiner. The chief examiner reviews the case and will give a final result, whether that's a pass or a fail. Only when that process is complete, we've gone through double-blind marking, normalization, moderation, and adjudication, will we issue the final result. And at that time, the institution is confident that the result that we're issuing to the candidate is fair and an accurate representation of what they've done in the examination. So, moving on to preparation. Again, there is a page on the website, training and development exams, exam preparation, that gives you all the information that we have. One of the key documents, as I've discussed already, is the exam preparation guidance. This is an absolute must in terms of preparing for the exam, understanding what the examination panel, what the examiners are looking for. Every candidate should read that document. There's no 2 ways about it. There's also a range of other documentation available. So we always publish the past paper. So you'll see on that slide, the January 2024 past paper is available. You can download that, have a look at the different questions, etc., etc. We have past papers going back years, decade or more. Now, clearly, you have to be aware that from January 2024, the exam has changed. There is a greater focus on sustainability. So what you're doing in section 1A with regards to sustainable conceptual designs, that's going to be slightly different. 1B, as we've already discussed, is quite different. We're no longer responding to a client's brief. We're now writing to the client and we're saying, I can do things here. I can change the way we're using materials to give you what you want, but in a more sustainable way. Section 2C, few extra marks on carbon calcs. Section 2E, we're no longer looking for the program. It's all about the method statement. So if you are looking at previous exam papers from 23 and prior, you do have to be aware that there are subtle changes to the January 2024 paper. Now, I would still recommend you look back at previous papers. It gives you a good idea of the sorts of questions that you're going to see. It gives you a good idea of what we're looking for, but clearly you have to make sure you're preparing for the January 24 structured paper, the one that focuses more on sustainability. You will also see the Chartered Membership Examiner report. So the most recent one there is July 23. You will get the January 24 one published quite shortly. Now, the examiner's report is very useful because it actually tells the candidates, this is how candidates did in this particular exam and each question. This is what they did well. This is what they didn't do so well. This is why they got marks. This is why they got marked down. Now, clearly it's a generic report because you're dealing with a report on maybe 400 or 500 candidates sitting the exam. But there are patterns, there are trends, there are issues, pitfalls that candidates keep on falling into. And the chief examiner's report will highlight this and say, right, this is what you need to be aware of. Now, when you've read enough of these examiner reports, you should get a pretty good idea of the sorts of things, sorts of mistakes that you should be avoiding. In my view, one of the best bits of recent support and guidance is the critiqued exam answer script. So that was published in November of last year, and it was published in response to quite a bit of feedback from candidates, exam candidates. The exam candidates were often saying, look, you've got all of these past papers. Some of the papers have suggested answers, but those suggested answers have been written by experienced chartered structural engineers, many of them examiners. They've been written over many, many days, perhaps weeks. They haven't all been written in 7 hours, so they're not emulating the exam conditions. So yeah, they're good. They give us an idea as to how you might go about answering the question, but they don't give you an understanding of what good looks like. What is the standard of work that is expected from a candidate in the 7-hour chartered member exam? So for the first time, you now have an actual script from a candidate who passed the February exam, and basically that has been critiqued by the chief examiner to say, this is where the candidate did well, and this is where they didn't do so well, or perhaps could have added some more information. But most importantly, it tells candidates, this is what good looks like. If you're able to produce a similar quality of work and cover all the key aspects, then hopefully you should be in a position where you can get through and pass the exam. So again, read the guidance material that I showed you on the previous slide. That's absolute. But go through as much of this information as possible. Read the critiqued answer paper, look at the chief examiner's reports, and look at the exam paper. If possible, do past exams. Actually sit them under exam conditions. Very often candidates will say to me, Darren, I did 2 hours on a Monday night, 2 hours on a Tuesday night, 1 hour on a Wednesday night, 1 hour on a Thursday, 1 hour on a Friday. So I sat the exam under exam conditions because I did it in 7 hours. Well, that's not the case. You need to put aside some weekends and you need to sit the exam in exam conditions, 7 hours, one go. Part of the exam is being able to write and deliver over a 7-hour period. Most university exams don't last longer than maybe 2 or 3 hours. So you need to develop the skill, the endurance perhaps, to write for 7 hours and write clearly for 7 hours. There have unfortunately been occasions in the past where the candidate's handwriting has deteriorated to such a point that the examiners can't actually read it. And if they can't read it, they can't award marks. So building up the ability to write and draw for 7 hours is an important part of preparing for this exam. Take your sample papers, give it to your mentor, get them to mark your paper. If you're like the average candidate, that your first couple of attempts probably won't be great, but you'll get lots of useful feedback from your mentor. As you move through the preparation process over several months, then hopefully your attempts at the exam improve. the quality of your paper improves, and by the time you're ready to sit the exam, you've got a good chance of actually getting through the exam. And I can't emphasize more the importance of actually preparing for the exam. You know, you need to set aside several months to actually gear up for this exam, prepare, do past papers, read all the associated guidance. Now, if you can, you know, I think one of the best things you can do is look at this critiqued answer script, go through it with your mentors, but go on an exam preparation course. Now, some of them are held at HQ, some of them are held at local regional groups around the world, different regional groups around the world. All of the material on the website is great, and clearly you can sit down and discuss that material with your mentors, which is absolutely great. But in my view, you can't really replace the chartered preparation courses. The ability to sit down, talk with candidates in the same position as you, your peers, brainstorm, bounce ideas off each other, actually talk to the presenters and say, what would you do here? What would you do there? You know, and the people who are delivering the courses are very experienced in this. So if you can get on an exam preparation course, whether it be at HQ, whether it be regionally, please do so. Now, up until last year, we did have an online exam preparation course that you could access through the institution website. Clearly, because of the changes in the 2024 exam, that particular online course needs to be updated, and we're in the process of doing that now. But clearly, once that course is published back on the institution website and is available online to all candidates around the world, it needs to reflect the current format, and that's why we need to make the changes now. But keep an eye out for the online course. It will be back on later this year. But if you can, try and get to a physical preparation course, whether it be at your local regional group or at HQ. So that's the preparation courses and the preparation guidance. I hope that gives you enough information to understand where you need to go, what you need to look at in order to prepare for the exam. Please use the information on the institution website. And why do I say that? Well, lots of people put things on the web and say, this is how I passed the exam. Sometimes people who haven't even passed the exam put information on the web saying, this is how you should go about passing the Institution of Structural Engineers Chartered Member exam. If you're not looking at institution approved guidance, there's always a risk that whatever you're looking at may not be up to date. It may not be current, or quite frankly, it could be downright wrong. So always make sure that the guidance that you're looking at is guidance that is coming from the institution, and then you've got a guarantee that it's been reviewed and critiqued by the institution and will be accurate. So any questions or queries, please feel free to contact the membership department. You've got the email address, telephone number there. We'll direct you through to the exams department or the member of staff who can deal with your query. And finally, questions. So I see there's been a few questions in the chat box. So Darren, if I hand back to you and you can take us through some of those questions.
Thank you, Darren. Yes, that was superb. I'll go through the questions then. Why is the conceptual design included in the PRI if it is assessed within the Part 3 exam?
Really good question. And quite a simple answer insofar as the PRI and the exam test two different things. If you look at the PRI, you are presenting information on projects that you've worked on, that you should know inside out, back to front. You should be very familiar with them. You've also worked on those projects most of the time within a team, and you've had guidance from your superiors, from your bosses, your mentor, and you've had input from different individuals within that design team, and that's fine. You know, we question you in the PRI and you're able to present your work, fine. The Chartered Member exam tests something different. It's testing your ability to work independently without any support from your mentor or your boss, and to an unseen question. So it's testing conceptual design, but in a slightly different way. And it's making sure that you are indeed at the right level to produce two distinct, viable, sustainable, and ultimately safe solutions to the brief that's been put to you. It's easier to actually challenge the candidate and test the candidate on those skills within the examination, and that's why conceptual design is included in both the PRI but also within the chartered member exam.
Okay, thank you. Also, I've got another question here, which is there a plan to circulate a critiqued exam answer for the Bridges question in the future?
Yeah, that's an answer from Doug. Yes, we recognise that the critiqued question is a building question. Yes, we're hoping to produce more critiqued exam papers full stop, not just on the Bridges, but across all of the questions, because we want candidates to be looking at the new format exam from 2024 onwards. So that is something that the examinations panel will be working on in the future.
Okay, I think they are the couple of questions which I can see on my screen, to be fair, unless anybody else feels free to jump in and turn on their mic and ask.
We've got another question.
We've just had one, yes, pop in saying, so regarding the preparation of the portfolio for the interview, will there be a requirement to provide the year of the project, and will that be criticised? Can I record this CPD using my own table format, or does it need to be recorded on the activity sheet, which has only 2 spaces for 2 lines? A space which only has a space for 2 lines.
Read that one again, Dan, because I'm not sure that's really pertaining to the exam.
Yeah, it appears to be more for the preparation for the portfolio. It's not so much for an exam, reading that. So I read that immediately without
right.
Yeah.
Basically, when you're preparing your portfolio, it's up to you to decide which projects you wish to include in your portfolio. There's no regulation or rule that says the particular project that you're presenting has to be within the last 12 months or the last 24 months. It can be a project from 5 years ago. It can be a project from 5 weeks ago. It is fair to say that most candidates will include more recent projects in their portfolio for obvious reasons. The first one being, well, they're working on it or have worked on it recently, so they've got everything to hand. Perhaps one of the more important issues is probably the projects you're working on later on in your career are the ones where you've had more responsibility, and you're perhaps better able to articulate that you have met the standards or demonstrate that you've met the standards we're looking for in the PRI. So most candidates would tend to put in the most recent projects, but there's no reason why you can't put in a project from 5 years ago. I would probably put down the dates just to show when you did the project, but the dates aren't part of the PRI. You're not going to get failed because all the project work that you presented was from projects from 5 years ago. It's up to you just to find the right projects that demonstrate that you've satisfied all the 10 core objectives.
Okay, thank you. Do you foresee any teething pains for the markers given these changes?
Yeah, with any change in the exam, or with any change in the professional review, whether that be the PRI or the exam, we always have to recognise once you make a change, the candidates have to understand the change, the candidates have to respond to that change and answer the question appropriately. And in the same way, the examiners need to respond to that change and make sure that they're marking the exam appropriately. But that's why we have the trial marking meeting, so that all the examiners are on the same page as to what they should be doing. That's why we have the double blind marking. If one examiner just gets completely the wrong end of the stick and does something daft, well, in the moderation process, you'll say, well, hang on a second, one examiner has passed the candidate, one examiner has failed them by an absolute mile. There's a problem here. There's a misunderstanding somewhere. One of the examiners has got it wrong. And that's why we have the moderation process. That's why we have the adjudication process. And it's worthwhile highlighting an important point here. The institution wants you to pass the exam. You know, we want to have more chartered structural engineers. We don't want unhappy candidates. We don't want appeals. You know, but the fact is, the institution prides itself on standards, and it sets a very high standard. So yes, it's a case of we have high standards. We'll mark the questions and the papers to those high standards. But ultimately, we want to try and make sure the candidates and the examiners are in the best place to answer the question and to mark it correctly.
Okay, thank you. It is rumoured that penalty marks in the exam are higher than a scoring mark. Can you please clarify and also clarify any common mistakes from candidates?
Well, first of all, it's an urban myth that there's penalty marks as such. What we try to do is set out a marking critique and say, this is what we expect the candidates to include in their paper. And so if the candidate includes everything they were expected to see, they get a high mark, great. If they don't include it, it's not a penalty mark, it's just you don't get the marks because they haven't included the material and the content that we're looking for. So, you know, the idea that there's negative marking, that's just not the case. It's a case of if you don't put the information in, you won't receive the marks, and often you'll hear the term, you've been marked down, but the term marked down means that you haven't gained the marks that were available for that particular element of the question because you haven't put in the right answer or the right material. Common mistakes from candidates. First place to look, I'd suggest, is the chief examiner's reports, because you know you'll see a pattern. Generally, candidates will not put in two distinct solutions, so they'll change the material, but ultimately the load paths, grid design, etc., remains fundamentally the same. So changing material in and of itself is not sufficiently distinct. It has to be viable. So yeah, you can come up with a solution, but if it's something that a structural engineer or chartered structural engineer would look at and say, God, you'd never design that or build that, then it's not really viable. So they tend to be the common mistakes, at least apart in terms of section 1 of the exam. Section 2 of the exam, one of the biggest problems tends to be 2E. People try to have generic method statements, and they think, well, if I come prepared with a general method statement, I can somehow, you know, tweak it or morph that to reflect the question. The examiners can see through that a mile away. What they want you to do is look at the question they've asked you and come up with a method statement that reflects the question. So, yeah, you always have to be aware of the question and tailor your answer to that question. Trying to come up with pre-prepared material to shortcut the exam never really works. So, you know, there's some of the common mistakes. Running out of time, or I didn't have enough time to do section 2E. Everyone can pick up at least 2 or 3 marks from section 2E. The 2 or 3 marks could be the difference between you passing section 2 or not passing section 2. So time management is often key. But I would urge you to look at the chief examiner's reports, because there'll be far more comprehensive information there about that particular, you know, the common pitfalls.
Okay, thank you. Could you please clarify the pass mark for the iEng exam? There doesn't seem to be clear information about this on the website.
Oh, the iEng exam, the pass mark remains the same, so it's 40%. So it's the same as the chartered exam, I believe. I must admit, is that Nadia? I'm not overly familiar with the iEng exam. I haven't looked at it in a while. But if you email the membership team, that will get passed through to the exams department, and then I'll confirm that for you. But I'm pretty sure it's the same 40%.
Okay. Is there a marking scheme or any recommended book references from the iStruct that we can purchase?
We don't produce the marking schemes or make them public. That's for the examiners, really. In terms of book references, not really. All the material that I've mentioned in this presentation, reading the exam guidance, looking at past papers, looking at the critique script, going on a preparation course, that's the best way of preparing for the exam. Book references tend to be more about, well, you can look at different books to help you become a better engineer, but it's not about exam technique. All the information on exam technique is really included in the presentation that I've given you today. And as I said, the best thing is to go along on an exam preparation course. It really does make a difference. We look at the statistics of candidates who pass the exam, how many have gone on an exam preparation course as compared to those individuals who haven't gone on an exam preparation course. And taking the course puts you in a better position to pass the exam. Statistics show that.
Okay, yes, good. Yeah, I mean, if I could just add to that very quickly, if there was a book potentially, I think an iStruct reference, the Conceptual Design of Buildings, which is a very good one. I think it's written by some senior technical people and some graduates as well, and it's got some useful information in there, including worked examples and help on concept design, which can really accelerate those skills technically. That's just my take. So yeah, we move on to the next question. How many years of experience is needed to sit the CEng exam?
Okay, question from Abba. There isn't a defined minimum or maximum. What we say in our IPD regulations when you're going for your professional review is that on average, most candidates applying for the interview will have 4 years experience, there or thereabouts. A candidate might get enough experience in 3 years if they've been lucky enough to work on a wide range of projects and they're able to cover all the core objectives. Equally, it might take another candidate 5, 6, 7 years. So there's nothing to say, right, you're 25, can I take a chartered member exam? Yes, you can. If you feel you've got the right experience, if you've worked on the sorts of projects that would allow you to get through the exam, in theory, yes, you could take the chartered member exam with maybe 3 or 4 years experience. On average, candidates tend to have a little bit more, and it might be 4 or 5 years experience before they're taking the chartered member exam. But it's not about length of time, it's about quality of experience. And that's the same for the interview and for the exam. So you shouldn't really think of this as, well, I've done 4 years now, so I'm ready for the exam. What you should be doing is saying, I'm looking at past papers, I'm sitting the exam under exam conditions. My mentor is marking those papers and saying, yes, you're in a good place, it's time for you to go for the exam, or no, you need a little bit more time and a little bit more help. So less about the time taken, it's more about the quality of your experience, your preparation, and your ability to get through the exam. Obviously, we want candidates to get through the exam on their first attempt. So don't rush it, make sure you're ready for the exam.
Okay, thank you. Can any design codes be used in the exam, or must it be Eurocodes?
Any design code you want. So from whatever you're familiar with using, wherever you come from around the world, you can use whatever code. You just simply state the code at the beginning of the exam paper. So some people will use Euro codes, some people will use American codes. Absolutely fine as long as you state that at the start of the paper.
Okay, thank you. Looking at past exams, a lot of questions refer to reinforced concrete structures. What's the recommendation for candidates who have mostly worked on steel structures?
We don't specify the materials that you should use in the exam questions. Yes, some questions will lend themselves to concrete structures, but they can be built in steel, they can be built in timber. So it's really up to you to look at the question and say, okay, can this be built in steel? Would I be able to build it in steel or in timber or in concrete? It's entirely up to you to decide in your conceptual design how you're going to design it, what materials you're going to use, etc. Now, as I said, some structures will lend themselves to the use of a particular material, but we don't mandate it. It's up to the candidate to decide the appropriate material and design accordingly. And very often, whilst I've said earlier on in the presentation that candidates simply changing the material, that does not make it distinct, it's very often something that candidates will do and say, well, here's my first conceptual design, it's in concrete. Here's my second conceptual design, it's in steel. Clearly, it has to be more than just a material change. So how the load paths work, etc., needs to be changed. But it's quite possible that they'll use concrete and steel in two different solutions. That's absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all the questions, unless one flies in at the last minute. Here comes another one. In the exam, may I use BS 6399 for wind pressure calculations and use a Hong Kong code for concrete structure design? Would that be seen as inconsistent code use?
I'll be honest, that's a technical question that I wouldn't be able to answer. I would say that the general principle remains the same, that you can use any code as long as you specify the code. We're not looking for a candidate's ability to apply a particular code. We're looking for their ability, particularly in conceptual design, to understand really what we're looking for in the exam and produce two distinct, viable and sustainable solutions. But I'm not able to give you a definitive answer on that, so I'd recommend that you put that question through to the membership department. We'll run it by the examiners, but if I were forced to give an answer, I'd say as long as you specify the codes, there wouldn't be a problem.
Okay. Can we use, well, I don't know if this is a similar sort of answer, but can we use both American and Eurocode at the same time? I mean, can we use American code for one question, for Eurocode for another, or can we take a combination from Eurocode, for example, and do a shear design accord? Yeah, no, it sounds like, again, about mixing the codes up. Yeah.
Answer to that one, I mean, ultimately, you've got to make it easier, as easy as possible for the examiners to see that you have the right ability, competence to be a chartered structural engineer. Now, as far as I'm aware, in a particular project, you wouldn't hop and trot between different codes. You try to be consistent in using those codes. So, my advice would always be make it as simple as possible. Don't create a situation where there can be misunderstandings with the examiners. But if you do find yourself in a position where you want to use an American code for one part of the question and a Euro code for the other, I'd check that with the examinations department first. Email the institution, set out the scenario that you're looking at, and we can run that past the exams panel just to be sure.
Okay, thank you. There's another question which I'm trying to make sense of at the moment. I do believe the candidates who sit the exam are experienced engineers. However, the pass rate is still quite low. The advice from the examiners is to write something they are looking for. Please, what's specific the examiner looking? What specifically is the examiner looking for?
Well,
I'm not
I
sure.
think the answer to that is yes. If you look at global pass rates, the global pass rates are quite low, but pass rates vary from region to region and country to country and candidate to candidate. It all comes down to preparation. If you are undertaking appropriate preparation, if you're looking at all the material on the website, if you're going on exam preparation courses, you're doing the past papers, you're getting them marked by your mentors, etc., and you're basically undertaking a program that might be 4, 5, 6 months. The pass rate is much higher than the global pass rate. So I've seen regional groups where pass rates have been at 50% because the candidates are attending preparation courses and doing all the things that I've said they should be doing. If you're not doing that, if you're not engaging and preparing appropriately, well, the pass rate is going to be much, much lower. Now, in terms of what we offer the same guidance, the same support to candidates around the world. It's all on the website. So if you look at that guidance document that I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, that will tell you exactly what the examiners are looking for. They'll tell you what distinct, viable and sustainable means. They will tell you that, you know, this is what principal elements are. You know, it will set out quite clearly what we're looking for. The critiqued answer paper shows what we're looking for. This is a paper that a candidate wrote, 7 hours that candidate had, and it shows what they've delivered in 7 hours. Now, that gives you a pretty good idea of what the examiners are looking for. But you've always got to remember, and I said this earlier, don't come with pre-prepared material and try and morph that to fit the question. You've got to be able to look at the question and produce something that answers the question. So yes, look at the paper from the candidate that passed, look at all the guidance documentation, but ultimately you've still got to go through the preparation process, do the past papers, and be in a position to answer the question that is actually put to you in the exam. Make it specific to that question. So that would be my advice, but certainly read all of the guidance that I've mentioned in the presentation.
Okay, I think that's brought us to the end of the questions. So thank you for that, Darren. Just to make everyone aware as well, a CPD certificate has been attached to this chat. So you'll see that in the chat box. So please feel free to download for your records. And thank you really to everybody who attended. I hope you got something from this. We give our thanks here to Darren, who's given us a comprehensive overview really of the chartered membership exam process, bringing us up to date with all the changes. Covered a lot of ground there, including sustainability, really highlighting how we as an institution are acting responsibly in terms of incorporating this relevant information in our qualification process to upskill engineers. So thank you for that. So that, I guess, brings us to the end of our session. So yes, thank you for attending, and in case you've not already downloaded the CPD certificate, please do so. And yes, goodbye everyone.
Thanks very much, Dan.
Okay, thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.